PMQs Unpacked is coming in, just 15 minutes' time. Rishi Sunak's just left number 10 in his big motorcade on the way to Downing Street. Let us know where you are. If you are watching on the YouTube channel, let us know where you are. What do you think might come up at PMQs today? If you're heading out and you're going to miss, you can't watch on the YouTube, don't forget you can take Times Radio with you on the Times Radio app as well. You can download it on your Apple, your Android, or whatever it might be. And you can catch up. So if you ever miss any of the show, you can catch up 7 days of all the programmes, not just ours. And there's a sleep timer as well. So if you want to, if listening to Times Radio makes you go to sleep, it will eventually turn off. So that's handy. You can just download it where you go. But let us know if you are watching along on YouTube. Let us know what you think might come up. What might Keir Starmer ask? Here to guide us through what might come up is Lava Spirit, Times Red Box of Porter. How are you?
Hi, morning, Matt.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. What do you think? I mean, it feels to me like, obviously I was off last week, so I was consuming politics like a normal person, but it felt like possibly the best week that Keir Starmer had ever had in politics. That he finally dealt with the Jeremy Corbyn question, said he's definitely not coming back. He had a nice little trip to Ukraine as well. There was something else that went quite well. It felt like there was
Nicola Sturgeon, obviously.
Nicola Sturgeon's the other thing. Yeah, put all that together, pretty good times if you're Keir Starmer right now.
And the only unfortunate thing, of course, that it wasn't the week didn't have a Prime Minister's questions because, of course, we were on recess, so he wasn't able to capitalise on it. But, of course, today he has the opportunity to do that. I think you may see all of those themes come up. I think it's likely, given the kind of resurrection of old Tory divisions over the protocol, that we might see that come up as well. I also think, in light of that news we had about the budget surplus yesterday, that that adds extra pressure on the government public sector pay rises. I think the fact that the RCN have paused their strike action to talk with the government, they're sitting down with Steve Barclay today. I think, we've seen strikes play out again and again in Prime Minister's questions. There's obviously a risk that Rishi Sunak gets his messaging out there about Starmer being in hock to the unions, but I wonder if Starmer will wager that actually the fact that these negotiations are continuing and still there's been no breakthrough might be worth him raising it again. And then I think we're probably likely, I mean, we may not, but I think the recent news that we've seen over the British steel industry, the loss of those hundreds of jobs in Scunthorpe, I think you've seen shadow cabinet ministers hot off the press of that news, criticising the government for neglecting the steel industry, saying that they would invest in new technologies to try and partner with the steel industry and protect those jobs. So I think possible that we might see that come up too. So quite a few things that could come up.
That broke about 10 o'clock, so it might be a bit late for Keir Starmer to have ripped up his entire plan, but you wouldn't be surprised if he went on that.
No, of course. I mean, and also, there are other options. So people, backbench Labour MPs or others might be sort of teed up to see whether or not they could change that.
Shamima Begum, do you think that doesn't feel like something that Keir Starmer would necessarily want to get into?
I think given the fact that he's got so many other things that he could get into today, that's delicate territory. I think the Labour Party might perhaps be wary of getting into that too soon after the announcement before they've completely worked out what it is exactly that they'll be saying on that. So I'm not sure that will come up today. And I think the other thing I'd be interested to see to come up is, of course, those comments that we saw from Keir Starmer about loathing Boris Johnson. I wonder if that will come up from elsewhere, though you'd suggest not. But I think that question of political language and the way that personalities are spoken about in politics might well come up.
I wonder if Rishi Sunak will play the Jeremy Corbyn card that he often does at PMQs and says, you were the guy who started the shadow cabinet. Because I suppose if he does do that, there's a risk for him that Keir Starmer actually from the dispatch box says, I'm the guy who kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party.
It's interesting.
And he's not coming back.
Whether or not this is a fight that Keir Starmer wants to lean into and have. Of course, I think, people in number 10 will be a little bit frustrated at the fact that there was so much good news for Keir Starmer last week when they feel, and they're constantly keen to ram home the previous support that Keir Starmer obviously had. You saw that in social media videos released by the party last week and in a number of Conservative MP interventions on that as well, keen to point out that Keir Starmer has been loyal to Jeremy Corbyn in the past. But you're right that in doing so, he would hand an immediate opportunity for Keir Starmer to just emphatically say that he's taken that decisive action once and for all. So I think whether or not you see that is an interesting question, but I think probably Rishi Sunak might want to lean into that, given that they think in CCHQ that in order to highlight the kind of flip-flopping or Keir Starmer not necessarily believing one thing or another, being firm in his beliefs, that's something I think CCHQ want to ram home, and this is perhaps one of the more easy issues on which they might be able to do that.
On the subject of what Keir Starmer actually believes, he made a speech yesterday, I think, to the NFU saying he had rural communities in his DNA. This morning, Diane Abbott, obviously a friend of Jeremy Corbyn's, has tweeted a picture of Keir Starmer at a sort of pride event. We make Camden proud, says his T-shirt, and he's got a placard with the sort of trans the colours on. And then she said, Keir Starmer now saying that rural communities are in his DNA. Bet he did not say that when he was running for Holborn and St Pancras, which he appears to be generating quite a lot of heat from. I suppose it's a bit weird, but as much as anything, it's a reminder that, you know, Rishi Sunak does have problems on the Tory backbenches, particularly over Brexit, as we're seeing this week. But all is not completely well on the Labour benches either.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. But obviously what we've seen from Diane Abbott this morning is not new. It's not a kind of new intervention from a kind of newly disgruntled backbench MP. This is someone who, of course, has been critical of Keir Starmer for a little while. But I think obviously what you are seeing, having had that news about Jeremy Corbyn last week and that being a real flashpoint with that segment of the party, that I think it's likely that you'll see things like this heat up a little bit more. And I think they will be looking quite carefully to see whether or not the kind of frequency and also the intensity, which I think just to have a picture of him there emphatically put, you know, in some ways that's a slight escalation.
What the point she's making is that
it's interesting because, of course, her staunch ally, Jeremy Corbyn, is from a constituency very nearby. But of course, she's saying that, I mean, if she wants, she's trying to obviously question whether or not it's possible for Keir Starmer, or genuine for Keir Starmer, to say that he has rural constituencies in his veins. In
fact, if you on this very subject, Danny Finkelstein is terrific in the Times today on the sort of impotence of the Labour hard left and how they're a bit cross about Jeremy Corbyn being kicked out, but they're not actually going to do anything about it. So, you know, sniping like that on Twitter from Diane Abbott, but ultimately she'd rather that Keir Starmer was Prime Minister than the Tories. You would assume. You would assume. And they're not going to go off and join Jeremy Corbyn's new party. So, yeah, Labour left are facing their moment of truth. You know, Times subscribers, get online and read that right now. As you can, Times subscribers can read Lara Spirit in your inbox, 2:30, the PMQs Unpacked email.
Yes.
Go to thetimes.co.uk/red box to subscribe to that. And in fact, Lara's doing the 8:30 email as well this week because Patrick McGrath's on holiday. Because apparently doing the radio for a week is very tiring. Because he was here last week. Lovely to see you, Lara. And in fact, you'll be able to listen to the PMQs Unpacked on the podcast later. The podcast has got a new logo. We're unveiling the new logo today. We finally updated it.
It's fantastic.
Good. She's paid to say that, but that's fine. Right, good. Lara Spirit will be here later on. She'll be listening to... Get out and log on, PMQs Unpacked. If you are still watching along online, Lara will be listening to the best of the rest so that we don't have to sit through them. Right, then, let's talk about... You've been sending in your messages about things that you've lost, especially in pubs. Why? Because Hugh Merriman, the rail minister, had his laptop stolen from a pub in central London. The story was broken by Rachel Burford, political reporter for the London Evening Standard, who joins me now. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you. What happened then? How serious was what was on the laptop, and how did the minister lose it?
Well, so the rail minister, he was out in central London in James Street in Covent Garden on February 2nd. And he just put his work laptop under his chair by the sound of it, and someone swiped it. I mean, that's in those central London pubs, anyone that goes in them has been in them before. And, you know, Covent Garden, Soho, it's a well-known pickpocketing hotspot. So much so that, you know, you'll see these posters all over the place saying, you know, keep an eye on your stuff. Thieves operate in this area. And obviously he took his eye off it for a little while, and someone took it.
And how serious was what was on it? It's not the first time that someone in government, whether a minister or officials, lost things. But how serious was what was on it? Did it make any difference to the ongoing rail disputes?
Well, I spoke to some union officials yesterday, some off the record, and they weren't, you know, best pleased. Obviously, they've been locked in these negotiations for months now, and they say, well, just sort of adds to the overall kind of air of incompetence that has sometimes come across in government. You know, I understand that the DfT, the Department for Transport, were slightly concerned that there were, you know, documents relating to the strike negotiations, confidential documents on the laptop and possibly in the laptop bag as well. So they were slightly concerned about it. It was reported straight away, and you know, the government were sort of quite keen to make us understand that these laptops are encrypted and they can be remotely wiped as well. So when they do get reports that they've been taken or stolen, they can be remotely all the information taken off them. But obviously it just means that, you know, Hugh Merriman then has to get a new laptop, and all his documents have to be backed up, and it's just extra time. And you know, the date this happened on February the 2nd was right smack bang in the middle of those huge strikes we saw, the biggest strikes in decades, Walkout Wednesday, where workers from across a number of sectors walked out, and then including the RMT and ASLEF unions, and then again on the Friday, the day after, they were out again. So it wasn't great timing for him either.
No, I suspect this. I don't know. Maybe Keir Starmer might make a joke of it later. What do you think might come up at PMQs today while we've got you?
I think strikes will, strikes are quite hard for Labour, but I think they would possibly come up today. I think, as you were saying earlier, I think Keir Starmer will want to avoid Shamima Begum. So I think he'll try and sit around cost of living and strikes.
Yeah, the stuff that people really talk about. Rachel, really good to speak to you. Thanks for that. Great story. Rachel Burford there from London Evening Standard with the news that Hugh Merriman lost his laptop at a pub. Oh, go on then, we'll do some more of these. It's a good excuse to play the music again. Oh, we haven't got the music. We haven't got it. Have a look in the record player. Have a look in any of the sleeves. If you are watching along on YouTube, Tim Shipman's just walked in. How are you, Tim?
I'm very well, thank you.
Looking lovely in pink.
Well, we like to brighten people's day up.
Yeah, very jolly.
For what may or may not be a bright and thrilling Prime Minister's questions.
Go on then, let's put the music on. Put the music on. People will love this. This is what people are here for. What have you lost? From the TfL man as he handed it back to me. 87222, start your message with the word Times. If you want to get in touch and let us know what you've lost, especially if it was in a pub. And get online to the YouTubes now. Let us know where you're watching along. PMQs Unpacked is next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. Coming up, PMQs Unpacked, and we'll play the quiz as well. If you want to play our hugely popular quiz, you can email me, matt@times.radio. We'll do that just before 1, but now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And a very good afternoon to Tim Shipman. Nice to see you. Loads of people already logging on. Richard in Fleet. I think that might be Richard who stopped me coming out of a shop and wanted to say hello when I was...
Well, your face seems unmarked, so he was presumably friendly.
He was very nice, Richard. I assume that is the same one. He says, I hope to join the chat later, but currently my daughter at the dentist. Stephen is in Taunton. Terry's in Liverpool. Wendy's in Wiltshire. Michael's in Melbourne. What time is it there? Stephen says it's greyish in Leicester. Jenny's in Sherwood Forest. Let us know where you're watching along, and let us know what you think might come up at PMQs today, because there's quite a lot going on in the news right now. What do you think Keir Starmer might go on, Tim Shipman?
Well, there are some occasions where a leader of the opposition wants to punch the Prime Minister on the nose. There are other ones where he wants to flag up something he cares about. But I think one of the most fun things for a leader of the opposition is sowing discord on the government benches, and I would be absolutely amazed if he doesn't have a good old crack at the Northern Ireland Protocol. What has Rishi Sunak negotiated? Is he weak, or is he prepared to stand up to the DUP and the ERG? And it's one of those PMQs sessions where I can see the Starmer questions being interesting, but we'll also need to be listening out for... are there Tory backbenchers standing up and putting his feet to the fire? What have the DUP got to say about everything?
Lara Spirit is out in the office, tuned in to pick out all the good questions from the backbenchers. Is there a risk for Keir Starmer going on Brexit, or can he get round the I wanted a second referendum question and instead land on saying to Rishi Sunak, look, if you need support to get to a sensible deal, I'm here to help.
Here I am with all my votes. I mean, technically speaking, Rishi Sunak probably doesn't need a vote in the House of Commons. Yeah. If he can get the support of people on his own side, he'd probably quite like to have one in order to get everybody to dip their hands in the you-know-what. But, you know, it's possible he's prepared to push this stuff through without a vote. And we're in this slightly curious position where, you know, the DUP, to be fair to them, are pretty consistent about what they do and don't want. The ERG are busy protesting hard about a deal that makes something a lot better that they themselves supported not 3 years ago. So, go figure.
How bad is it for Rishi Sunak right now? I mean, it was weird at the beginning of the week. We were sort of talking as if, actually, if he did manage to get this deal through, basically told Boris Johnson, the DUP, to go stuff themselves, and he sorted out this problem and the Stormont Assembly came back and so on, then he might look quite strong. But the fact he hasn't managed to do that, and he's sort of, everyone's marched up the top of the hill back down again, does play into this criticism of him being weak.
Yeah, and the handling of this has been bizarre. The customs stuff was agreed weeks ago, and Downing Street pretended it hadn't happened. Admittedly, they've been trying to get somewhere on a kind of democratic lock for EU sort of single market regulation in Northern Ireland. Not clear whether they've got that over the line yet, and then it's, you know, unclear whether it would satisfy the people who are getting hot under the collar about it at the moment. But, you know, there's been criticism in Whitehall of the way he's handled the DUP. I mean, a lot of other people I've spoken to who've handled the DUP before think, you know, these are guys who are not going to agree to anything regardless. They're just, you know, have spent careers saying no to things. Ultimately, you know, they'd quite like a hard border in Ireland because that's what they believe in. You know, they believe that, you know, you shouldn't be putting borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of the country. But it was Boris Johnson who drew that border, and Boris Johnson now seems to be one of the people most uptight about it all. So I can understand Sunak's frustration. I mean, you know, Starmer presumably would quite like this sorted, because if he does become Prime Minister, the last thing he needs is to be dealing with all this again.
Well, exactly. Having it all tidied up and not having to immediately...
You know, the hope for Sunak is if he has got something resembling a practical deal that will work, then push it through, and hopefully in a year's time it just looks like it's working and the sting is taken gradually from this anyway. But, you know, he's in a weak position. He's got people hot under the collar about the budget. He's going to have people hot under the collar about what is presumably going to be a fairly poor performance in the local elections. And if you add to that a fairly poor performance about Brexit and questions being raised about whether he's doing enough for Ukraine by the Johnsonian wing of his own party, and you start to get to the position where it's not absurd to imagine that he might not be Prime Minister by the end of this year.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a lot there. Let's see if Keir Starmer can take all of that and turn it into 6 pithy questions. We go live now to the House of Commons. This is PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio and on a YouTube channel. It is question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Ukraine? I had the privilege last week of seeing firsthand the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, and we must continue to stand united in this House in support of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, can I also say that the thoughts of the whole House, I'm sure the whole country, will be with the family of Nicola Bulley at this very, very difficult time. And can I welcome the new member for West Lancashire to her first PMQs.
Labour holds
Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is proud to be the party of the Good Friday Agreement and peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. We welcome attempts to make the protocol work more effectively. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it has been poorly implemented and that the basis for any deal must be removing unnecessary checks on goods?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me welcome the honourable lady to her place and associate myself with the remarks of the honourable gentleman about Nicola Bulley's family. Our thoughts are, of course, with them. As he knows, we are still in active discussions with the European Union, but he should know that I am a Conservative, a Brexiter and a Unionist, and any agreement that we reach needs to tick all 3 boxes. It needs to ensure sovereignty for Northern Ireland. It needs to safeguard Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it needs to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I will be resolute in fighting for what is best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Well, there was me doubting that Keir Starmer would want to touch Brexit with the barge pole, and there he is. Goes wading right in. It actually appeared to be slightly siding with the government's view that the protocol has been poorly implemented. And this is the criticism that the EU, and especially, has been overzealous.
Yeah, there are two groups of theological people about Brexit, and the EU has been one of them. And for a long time, it was seen as this sort of independent being that sort of floated above the debate while people in Britain had an argument amongst themselves. But of course, it's a participant in this, and it has done a lot of things based on a theoretical threat to the single market that doesn't appear to be very real in practice. And part of what the customs deal, which I think pretty well everybody thinks looks like a reasonable solution, is that you have green lanes with no checks at all for things that are going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, and things that might go on into the single market in the south go through a red lane. And as far as I'm aware, even the ERG is happy with that, though some of them mutter about, well, these border posts. Well, you need border posts for the red lanes, but not all of them seem to understand that. But that's the sort of practical side of it. The bit that's the problem is all about EU law and who's in charge of interpreting it, and theoretically, is Northern Ireland still a full part of the United Kingdom? But as I said before, a lot of the decisions that separated it were taken in 2019 and 2020 by Boris Johnson, leading light in the ERG. So, Sunak is trying to deal with the practicalities. But, as you say, that was a pretty... that was a nice softball opening question, and it allowed Sunak to put down a marker with his own people and say, this is what I care about. The problem he's got is that, Rishi Sunak, whisper it quietly, was a Brexiteer before Boris Johnson was. He turned around to David Cameron immediately and said, no, I'm supporting Brexit. But most of the people who supported him in the leadership contest were the parts of the party that were less keen on it. And so he's been kind of attached to them and is perceived to be one of them now. And he's keen for us not to see him that way, and certainly keen for the right of his party not to see him that way.
It's interesting, he sort of stated quite boldly, I'm a Conservative, a Brexiteer and a Unionist, and any deal needs to tick all three boxes. And clearly he's trying to point his language directly to the DUP and the ERG that, I agree with it. I agree with it.
Yeah.
And it's just whether or not they all end up then agreeing.
And the people doing the negotiating in Brussels believe they have ticked all 7 of the DUP's requirements. The DUP appears last night to have told the ERG that the government had made progress on 3 or 4 of them. So obviously the DUP are the guardian of their own tests, but then the question is were the tests set up to be hit, or were they set up to be failed?
Yeah, were they a genuine concern, or was it the assumption? Because 7's quite a lot.
Yes,
they wouldn't be able to meet them all, and if they have now met them all, then that's a problem. Right, let's go back then to lots of you talking on the YouTube channel. Rishi Sunak's got his glasses on today, and James Cleverly doesn't appear to have shaved, so that's what you're missing if you're not on the YouTube channel. Well, let's go back to the House of Commons. Question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we all agree that the protocol can be improved, but there are trade-offs and we need to face up to them. His predecessor told businesses that there would be no forms, no checks, no barriers of any kind. That was absolute nonsense and it destroyed trust. So in the interest of restoring that trust, will he confirm that to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, the deal he's negotiating is going to see Northern Ireland continue to follow some EU law?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that the honourable gentleman is jumping ahead. We are still in intensive discussions with the European Union to ensure that we can find agreement that meets the test that I set, and that is sovereignty for Northern Ireland, It's Northern Ireland's place in our precious union, and it is to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I have spent time engaging and listening to those communities in Northern Ireland, businesses and political parties. I have a good understanding of what is required, and I will keep fighting until we get it.
Good understanding of what's required, and he'll keep fighting until he'll get it. Will he get it? That's the big question. I suppose it depends, as you were saying, if those seven
Well, I think
testers...
he thinks he probably has got something approximating it. The question is persuading other people. There's this whole issue of following EU law. Technically speaking, there's no EU law in Northern Ireland. It's what the British Parliament has chosen to align Northern Ireland with, in line with some of those regulations. What Sunak appears to be trying to get is some kind of lock for the Assembly in Belfast to be able to say, actually, we don't want that regulation or that regulation, in the same way that they can throw the whole deal out once every 4 years. My understanding is you could have a committee of the Assembly that would inspect these regulations as they arrived, and if there was something particularly onerous for Northern Ireland, they'd be able to get rid of it. And that's what he's working on. And on that basis, I think he thinks he ought to have a deal. But this is now Starmer getting quite clever, because the first part of that was effectively saying Boris Johnson talked a load of old tosh about his deal, which most members of the cabinet at the time would acknowledge, what the Prime Minister said publicly about the deal he'd signed was not accurate. I certainly think that's the view that the current Prime Minister has about what the former Prime Minister said. But he's effectively saying, I'm inviting you to be rude about Boris Johnson, this man who's causing you great amounts of trouble. So Sunak didn't really bite on that. And then, talking about any EU law remaining, that is a red flag for the DUP and for large parts of the ERG. And he's effectively just trying to now cause as much trouble as possible.
Interesting, though, that Keir Starmer appeared to be trying to sort of help get this over the line, as we were saying in the first questions. But then when he's saying, why won't you admit that it'll still be under EU law? Actually, all that's going to do is wind up the ERG and the DUP and make it less likely that that the deal might go through. Let's go back then.
It's tempted to say that's politics, baby, but yes.
Yeah. It depends if Keir Starmer wants a bit of fun today, or does he want this all sorted out before he becomes Prime Minister later?
Both.
That's cakeism for you. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. This is PMQs Unpacked Live, and it's Keir Starmer's question number 3.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is biting his tongue, but at some point the irreconcilables on his benches are going to twig and they're going to come after him. The former Trade Minister says there can be no role for the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. So will the Prime Minister be honest with them and tell them that's not going to happen?
Mr. Speaker, now again, we need to keep going to actually secure an acceptable agreement. But for the honourable gentleman to be talking about a deal that he hasn't even seen, that we are still negotiating, that isn't finalised, and it's his usual position when it comes to the European Union. It's give the EU a blank cheque and agree to anything they offer. It's not a strategy, Mr. Speaker. That's surrender.
Wow, it's not a strategy. That's good language from both of them today, actually. The irreconcilables. I mean, Theresa May could tell you a few things about those, and then saying that they will come after him as they did with Theresa May.
Yes, well, I mean, they already are, to be fair.
Yeah.
But yes, and then Sunak trying a little bit of Boris Johnson playbook on Labour there. All you want is a blank cheque from the EU, and you've not even seen this deal yet, which is a card he can keep playing for as long as he wants. There is one. But without being wholly persuasive, it's fair to say. But and talking about surrender, which of course was the great buzz phrase that Dominic Cummings got Boris Johnson to spout in the autumn of 2019 about the Benn Act, which stopped him doing a no-deal
The surrender bill.
The surrender bill, the surrender act. So, and, I think it's fair to say that people with memories of DUP spokesmen of the past, no surrender was a pretty big part of the late Ian Paisley's vocabulary. So, desperately trying to play some tunes there. But I'm not sure from the noise behind him that it's the right of his party is buying that particularly.
I mean, just looking through dozens of times, I was trying to count them up. Boris Johnson referred to surrender, the Surrender Act, the Surrender Bill, the Surrender Act, surrender capitulation.
Well, I've been writing about this for my third book, he said, with a bit of product placement. But in the key debate, I think Johnson mentioned it 21 times.
Yeah, so maybe Rishi Sunak's been reading the same bits. You should get him to help out with researching for your book. Let's go back to the House of Commons.
Only if he's at a loose end, which of course he might be by the end of the year, but I'm hoping to publish before then.
Yes. Hopefully you'll get your book out before he leaves Downing Street, unlike
that can be
Paul,
the paperback update.
Harry and James and their book on Liz Truss. Back to the House of Commons now. Question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's not my questions he's avoiding, it's their questions he's avoiding. His predecessors
pointed
wasted
to the Tory
months
backbenchers
pushing
there.
the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. If implemented, it would tie us up in battles with the EU, the United States and others at precisely the time we should be building common ground to boost our economy and show unity against Putin. Now, the Prime Minister clearly wants a closer relationship with the EU, so can he confirm that if there's a deal, he will pull the protocol bill?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, what the honourable gentleman wants to put the EU first. I want to put Northern Ireland first. And on these questions, the honourable gentleman said he would respect the result of the referendum, and then he promised to back a second one. All the while, he was constantly voting to frustrate Brexit. And I know what the British people know, that on this question, he can't be trusted to stick up for Britain.
Wow, can't be trusted to stick up for Britain. That's quite...
Well, it's the old tunes again.
Yeah.
But it's pretty, fair play to Sunak. He's trying to get his own side behind him by attacking Labour, but he's not answering the questions, and there's a very good reason why he's not. Speak to people on the right of the Tory party, and you say, well, what is the outcome here if you push this bill through? It's basically a trade war. Is that what if their wishes and desires are followed to the the furthest extreme, then there are only a couple of outcomes here. There's a united Ireland at one end, and there's a massive trade war with the EU at the other. And neither of those looks particularly appetising to large sections of the government or the rest of the House of Commons. But Sunak doesn't want to have a trade war with the EU. And the question that Starmer asked there was one that journalists were asking Downing Street at the weekend, and anyone who read the weekend copy will see quite clearly that their view is if they get a deal, they don't need this bill. And there's questions about whether the bill defies international law. It's certainly believed to by the EU, and that they would then respond in kind. And people like Boris Johnson say, well, pass the bill, and then you've got more leverage. Rishi Sunak's belief is that he's been getting on quite well with them. They've been prepared to give him things that they were not prepared to give Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who they didn't like because they kept threatening to go around, passing bills like this. And he thinks he's got a lot further. And frankly, the detail that's been explained to me, it suggests that, he has got quite a lot more than what Boris Johnson got. So from his point of view, this bill is a bit of a red herring. If you're the ERG and you're Boris Johnson wanting to cause trouble, you say, well, you need the maximum leverage here. You need to pass this bill. But passing it would probably destroy the talks and probably leave us with tariffs on various of our products.
So just don't drop it, but also don't pass it. Just sort of leave it over there and pretend it's not there. You've said a couple of times, Boris Johnson says this, Boris Johnson says that. The weird situation we're in is Boris Johnson hasn't said anything.
He hasn't said a damn thing, no.
And it's all friends and sources and allies and nudges and winks.
Well, look, some of these people are genuine friends and some of them are genuine sources and some of them are official sources. Yeah. No one would have written what we all wrote at the weekend, that this is Boris Johnson's view, unless we were absolutely certain that that is Boris Johnson's view from people who are credibly employed to speak for Boris Johnson. No, you're right. He has been clever enough not to go public with this yet, and there's a lot of people in the sort of middle of the Tory party who are looking at this and thinking this is not probably actually doing Boris Johnson a great many favours. That while this might be ramping up excitement from the ERG and people who might want Boris Johnson to come back, it is also making larger the group of Tory MPs who would say anybody but Boris.
Yeah.
But there's another game going on here, of course. Damien Green, the head of the One Nation group, was deselected earlier in the week as an MP after 30, 40 years. And there are people who run a grassroots organisation in the Tory party who say anyone who's been nasty to Boris Johnson, who resigned from his cabinet or said publicly that he should resign as Prime Minister, they're going to deselect a lot of them. There's 60 people we want to get rid of, they say. Now, that's up to local constituency parties. They won't be able to pull that off everywhere. But the fact that they've already managed to do for Damien Green shows that this is a pretty brutal game going on inside the Tory party at the moment.
We had David Campbell-Bannerman, who's from this Conservative Democracy organisation, on yesterday, but he was saying exactly that. 60 people moved against Boris Johnson. They should all feel the heat. Of course, one of those 60 people is, in fact, Rishi Sunak himself.
Correct.
I'm not sure they're necessarily going to be that successful trying to deselect the Prime Minister.
No, I wrote a story a couple of months ago suggesting that this organisation was keen to have a grassroots meeting at which they would have a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Now, Boris Johnson's people distanced themselves very firmly from that at the time. Might be interesting to ask them again this week whether that's still their
That's
view.
still the case, yeah. Right, we'll go back to the House of Commons now then. This is question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the sound you hear is them cheering the Prime Minister, pulling the wool over their eyes. It's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the 30th anniversary of the Downing Street Declaration. Tony Blair and John Major both recognise that politics in Northern Ireland is built on trust and not telling people what they want to hear, and the need to take seriously the concerns of both communities, nationalist and unionist. It's vital their voices are heard. So can the Prime Minister confirm that whatever deal he brings back, this House will get a vote on it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, Parliament will express its view. But what is crucial? But what is crucial here? But what is crucial here is that this is not about his desire to play political games in this House with this situation. This is about what is best for the people and communities of Northern Ireland. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what I will keep fighting for.
Keir Starmer.
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologise. I can't count. That was number 5, not number 6.
You may well be the next chance of the Exchequer.
Wishing it away. Some news there, though, Tim. Of course, the Parliament will...
yes, but that's not news.
Trying to egg it up.
It's the form. But it's the form of words. Yeah. He said, "Can we have a vote?" And he said, "Parliament will be able to express its view," which can mean almost anything.
Yeah.
If you're passing a statutory instrument without a vote, but it goes through on the nod, that is still expressing a view. Yeah. I hate to be punctilious and boring about it, but he did not commit there to a vote, and I think he quite deliberately didn't commit to a vote. Now that to your average punter may seem a bit like dancing on the head of a pin, but that's how political soundbites work.
But that is important.
Yes, it's definitely important. He was trying to pin him down to say, there will be a vote on... What he did not say is there'll be a vote on the floor of the House of Commons. He said Parliament can express a view, and it can express a view by abstaining, it can express a view by not having a vote, it can express a view by nodding it through without a vote. And technically speaking, everybody I've spoken to doesn't think there needs to be a vote.
Well, Wendy on the YouTube channel says Parliament will express its view doesn't mean a vote.
Correct.
Good point, Wendy. We don't need Tim, really. Rachel says, weak from both today. Don't think I could remember any of Starmer's questions.
Oh, I'm glad that's them, not us.
Catherine agrees. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think she's talking about them rather than us. It's an interesting point, though. There's not a lot... I'm not quite sure what the sound bite is.
Not a lot to chew on so far.
That Starmer's going to go for. It might,
but it's not even a soundbite. It's just a case of causing awkwardness and discomfort. And I think he's pretty much succeeded.
He's probably done that.
We talk a lot. The point I boringly make every other week, but listen to the noise behind. There ain't much cheering for Rishi Sunak today. He's tiptoeing his way through a minefield, and he's not particularly armed with any flame retardant clothing.
I can't totally see if Boris Johnson's in the chamber. I don't think he is. We will. I'll try to keep my eye out in just a sec as we go back to the House of Commons for question. This is actually question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I take it from that this House will get a vote, and I look forward to that vote in due course.
I think we've established that's not
because
what we're
everyone
from that.
knows the basis of this deal has been agreed for weeks. But it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through. He should accept our offer, ignore the howls of indignation from those on his side who will never take yes for an answer. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
Mr. Speaker, what I am doing is talking and listening to the people of Northern Ireland. That is the right thing to do. It's to make sure that we can respond and resolve to the concerns of the unionist communities and businesses in Northern Ireland, and that is what I will keep doing. But, Mr. Speaker, we know, when the Honourable Gentleman talks about his plans, we have heard that tomorrow he's going to announce 5 missions. But we already know what they are. It's uncontrolled immigration, it's reckless spending, it's higher debt, and it's softer sentences. And for the fifth pledge, Mr. Speaker, we all know it's that he reserves the right to change his mind on the other 4.
There we are. There we were. We wanted the soundbite. He says he doesn't need to worry about his wreckers on the back benches. He will put country before party, and he can use Labour votes to get everything through.
Yeah, I mean, there's bad outcomes here for Rishi Sunak. There's not getting a deal. There's getting a deal and whacking it through with no vote. And there's getting a deal and whacking it through with Labour votes. Yeah. I would imagine he thinks that's probably the least appetising of the 3.
Well, in fact, this week I spoke to Simon Clarke, former Cabinet Minister, of course, under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and asked him exactly that question about if Rishi Sunak uses Labour votes to get anything through. Let's take a listen.
Well, I very much hope clearly that a deal is agreed which does work for everybody, and everyone needs to see the text of a deal before we can start to speculate about how it would be received in the Commons. But look, do I think there would be a very real problem for the government were it to be a deal which didn't carry the support of the DUP, were it to be a deal which did leave Northern Ireland subject to EU law or in the single market in some way, then I think that is just the reality of where we're at, and no one wants this to go down that route.
Yeah, I mean, he basically said it was unwise, I think, that the idea of, or possibly worse than that, to rely on Labour votes. I mean, if that were to be the case, presumably Rishi Sunak would find a way to not put it through as, put it to a vote.
He just wouldn't have a vote. He'd do it in some other way. But it's very instructive listening to Simon Clarke there. This whole idea of, there can't possibly be any EU laws at all in Northern Ireland. I mean, this has been the situation ever since Brexit and ever since the deals were done. And they all rejected Theresa May's deal and said Boris Johnson's deal's great. Yeah. And that was the situation it put in place. And now they're complaining when Sunak is saying, we're going to deal with the practical issues. We're going to even give you some kind of lock on future regulations, giving you democratic say over them. But, if you don't want EU alignment on regulation in Northern Ireland, you need to draw the border somewhere else. Yeah.
And this is the point I said to put to Simon Clarke. This has been the problem. It's been nearly 6 years now.
And this
7
is
years.
A new challenge.
This has happened. If you are going to be outside the EU, then there is going to be a border. And if you don't want the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, then it has to go somewhere else.
Yeah. You either don't leave the EU, or you have a united Ireland, or you have a trade war. Yeah. Under what they are asking for. But it's not what they used to be asking for. And Sunak, at some point, he's either going to not do a deal, or he's going to have to say, I'm terribly sorry, but this is good enough. And if you don't like it, you can lump it. And then he's going to have, do what he can to cling on to his job. Yeah. But it will be very uncomfortable for him.
Well, there we are.
But I don't see sitting around hoping it goes away and pretending you aren't really doing a deal and having this drag on for another fortnight is particularly going to do anybody any good, least of all the Prime Minister, because he just starts to look not only weak but indecisive. And, if he believes in what he's got, and maybe he hasn't quite got all of it over the line, he can turn around to Ursula von der Leyen and say, look what I've had to put up with today. I need more help. Fine. But
maybe.
At some point, he needs to say, right, this is it. It's a lot better than it used to be. and you're going to have to live with that, people.
Yeah. And then ultimately call some people's bluffs, I suppose, rather than just worrying about the DUP the whole time. No, it turns out none of you really enjoyed PMQs today. Mary says PMQs is really awful. Just an exchange of insults. Very unpleasant. Not even witty anymore.
Well, stick around. They'll be back to something.
Terry says, I would almost welcome back David Cameron responding to Peter Bone. Oh, they were the glory days.
Oh, and don't forget Mrs. Bone in the role she used to play.
Yes. Put a smile on his face or something, Theresa May said, wasn't she, at PMQs?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Anyway, let's not get bogged down in that.
I'm not sure Mrs. Bone still is Mrs. Bone, actually. So
right, well, we're definitely not going to get bogged down in that. Right, I'm going to go and find Lara Spirit because she's been watching the backbench contribution so that you don't have to. We'll bring you the best of the rest up next after we get the latest news from Eleanor Sherwood.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Matt, thank you. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister says he's a Conservative, a Brexiter and a Unionist, and any deal with the EU on Northern Ireland must tick those boxes. He's been speaking at Prime Minister's questions and has suggested any new deal will be put to a vote in the Commons. Rishi Sunak's promising to be resolute in defending Northern Ireland as discussions with the European Union on the protocol continue.
It needs to ensure sovereignty for Northern Ireland. It needs to safeguard Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it needs to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I will be resolute in fighting for what is best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Shamima Begum has lost the legal challenge over the decision to deprive her of her British citizenship. The 23-year-old was 15 when she travelled from East London through Turkey and into territory which was controlled by the so-called Islamic State. Nicola Bulley was identified by her dental records. The mum of two's body was found in a river in Lancashire on Sunday. Speaking at the opening of her inquest, a senior coroner said he's satisfied positive identification has been made. And a 50-year-old teacher has been stabbed to death during a lesson at a school near Bordeaux in southwest France. A 16-year-old student's been arrested and police are at the scene. In the weather, rain moving southeastwards this afternoon. That should clear by the evening, but more to follow in southern Scotland and northern England. Sunny spells and scattered showers in the west. Nick Ellaby has your sport.
We'll start with rugby union, where Australia's forwards coach Dan McKellar will leave Eddie Jones's team to become the next head coach of Premiership side Leicester Tigers. In the case of musical chairs, McKellar fills the vacancy at Leicester, created by Steve Borthwick, who took the England job to replace the sacked Eddie Jones. McKellar will start at Leicester in July, so he has a full pre-season with the club. Meanwhile, we're expecting to find out today if Wales rugby union players will go on strike ahead of this Saturday's Six Nations game with England. They've threatened to walk out over a contract dispute. Wales head coach Warren Gatland has delayed naming his team until things are sorted out. New Zealand cricketer Blair Tickner is back with the Test squad to play England tomorrow after he was given permission to go home and help his family following Cyclone Gabrielle.
My father's house has been fully destroyed, and it was good to get back, help them out, and obviously it's just hard times for the whole region, so helping out neighbours and whoever we could.
Blair Tickner was in tears in his interview ahead of the second Test with England, saying he's seen lives turned upside down in Hawke's Bay on the North Island. The bowler says his dad's construction business came in handy though.
Using the forklift and loader, I actually got my old man's loader stuck, so hopefully he doesn't watch this news report. It's about a metre in mud at the moment, so I probably shouldn't have driven around the neighbour's yard, and they said it wasn't that deep and I got it stuck, so sorry about that, Dad.
New Zealand's second Test with England starts tomorrow. Meanwhile, England bowler Jimmy Anderson is back on top of the ICC Test rankings after taking 7 wickets in the first Test. It's the 6th time in Anderson's career he's been officially the world's best bowler. And in Formula One, McLaren are considering a shock engine partnership with the team who dominated last season, Red Bull. The PA News Agency's been told McLaren's chief executive Zak Brown has visited Red Bull's engine division, which Red Bull have confirmed. Honda currently supply Red Bull's engines, but the world champions will make their own from 2026 to coincide with a major overhaul of F1 regulations. You can read more on these stories on the Times website and app.
This is Times Radio.
With TalkTalk, you can
along. Lara Spirit's just joined us in the studio. She was watching the backbench contributions so that we didn't have to. How was it?
It was actually a bumper week for
Was it?
Backbench. It actually was, yeah.
Are you suggesting that you've had more fun in the last half an hour than we have?
I actually think I have, yeah.
Right, okay. Where were we going?
It's a relatively low bar.
Yeah, it wasn't a vintage one. I mean, I think Tim and I did our best in the circumstances, I think, but it wasn't a vintage one. So where are we going first then? Lots of talk of Brexit. So you've got...
Lots of talk of Brexit. I think most significantly from Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, who won't have been short of opportunities to make his views known to Rishi Sunak in private, but today took the opportunity to make them conspicuously known in public, and made a quite noteworthy distinction between what he saw as kind of, the trade issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol, but more specifically, he highlighted important, in his words, constitutional and democratic issues. And he said it's unacceptable that EU laws are imposed on Northern Ireland with no democratic scrutiny or consent. And he said, I think quite noteworthily for anybody who's feeling optimistic about the current state of play, that tweaking wasn't going to cut it. But I hope we can listen to him.
Yeah, we can hear now. This is the leader of the DUP in the Commons, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Geoffrey Donaldson. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his efforts in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is unacceptable that Northern Ireland has been put in this place with a protocol imposed upon us that harms our place in the United Kingdom. It must be replaced with arrangements that are acceptable and restore our place in the United Kingdom and its internal market. Does the Prime Minister accept how important the constitutional and democratic issues are in relation to getting a solution? And will he agree with me that it is unacceptable that EU laws are imposed on Northern Ireland with no democratic scrutiny or consent? And will he assure me that he will address these fundamental constitutional issues and do so not just by tweaking the protocol, but by rewriting the legally binding treaty text?
Prime Minister.
Pithy question from Geoffrey Donaldson.
The honourable gentleman for his question, but also thank him for the role that he has played in recent months in articulating unionist concerns. I've heard loud and clear when he says he wants and needs these issues resolved so that he has a basis to work with others to restore power sharing, and I know that that is genuine. He raised a question of practical issues, and it is vital that these are addressed. But he also raises, Mr. Speaker, a vital question about the constitutional and legal framework in which these arrangements exist. And I can assure him that I agree. Addressing the democratic deficit is an essential part of the negotiations that remain ongoing with the European Union. And just as he has been consistent, so have I. And I can assure him that this is at the very heart of the issues that must be addressed.
Mr. McVeigh.
Tim, Lara's right that actually the very existence of the question from Geoffrey Donaldson, choosing to say something publicly in the House of Commons rather than keeping quiet and not rock the boat, is that there's a significance in that. Never mind what he actually went on to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. He's got a marker he wants to put down. He needs to be showing Brussels what he wants. I thought the wording of it was fascinating, though, because when we listened to Simon Clarke earlier, he was saying there can't be any EU law in Northern Ireland. That's not what Geoffrey Donaldson's actually saying there. He's saying there cannot be any EU law or regulations mirrored in Northern Ireland without democratic consent. And what Rishi Sunak is trying to get is democratic consent, or some kind of way that the people of Northern Ireland can say, no, we don't want that.
Yeah.
Now, the question then becomes, can he get it? Doesn't seem to quite have it yet. And if he does, will the DUP then say that's acceptable, or will they retreat to this line that a lot of the ERG are now spouting, that there cannot be any EU law in Northern Ireland? These are not the same thing. And if Donaldson is as good as his word, I think that gives a glimmer of hope for Sunak that he might be able to deliver something about democratic consent. The second part of it, though, is more problematic, because he wants the treaty rewritten. And that does get you into the realms of this not being about how it's exercised, but about what it says. And if you're rewriting the treaty, that's a bigger deal, and it also probably means you do need a vote in the House of Commons. That's the significance of both of those bits. But I think that's a very interesting and useful question. And if the DUP mean what they say, I don't think it's disastrous for Sunak.
Interesting, that. Really, really interesting. Thanks for unpicking that, Tim. Right, there's some more. Who was the next one you picked out, Lara?
So we had, by my count, 3 Tory backbenchers who raised concerns about illegal migration and specifically some of them when we might be seeing that fresh legislation that we've been promised from Rishi Sunak. That
Tackle
kind of
the
one
boats,
of his
one of his
fifth
top
priorities.
5 priorities.
Exactly, that we've been promised. 5 pledges very much in vogue at the moment.
So I think we can duck into, this is a Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister, of course, Esther McVey. Let's take a listen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made fixing illegal immigration across the Channel one of his key top priorities. He's also said that legislation will be required to stop it. I completely agree. So, can he tell us when we can expect to see this legislation coming forward, as time is of the essence? And can he explain why sorting out this issue did not feature on the Home Office Permanent Secretary's stated top 3 priorities for his department?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank my honourable friend for her question. She's right. Illegal crossings put people's lives at risk. It diverts resources away from those in genuine need, and it's unfair on those who migrate here legally. And that's why one of our 5 pledges to the British people is to stop the boats. We are working at pace on the legislation. It's important that it works. And in the meantime, our deals with Albania and France are already yielding benefits. But what I can tell her is that we want a system whereby if someone arrives in our country illegally, they will not be able to stay. Instead, they will be detained and removed to a country that they come from or a safe third alternative. That is the system that the Home Secretary and I are working hard to put in place, and that is what our legislation will deliver.
That was interesting. Esther McVey. In fact, when Esther McVey was talking about the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office not including it in top 3 priorities, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, was sat on the front bench nodding.
Nodding gravely, yeah.
Yeah, as if she also agreed with that. But like you were saying, it wasn't just Esther McVey. The Conservative MP, Theo Clarke, not normally, you would say is a disloyal Tory MP, normally keeps quiet on these things, but also raising concerns about immigration. Let's take a listen.
Commitment to tackling illegal migration and particularly the issue of small boats. But can I ask my right honourable friend if he will reconsider the government's proposal to relocate approximately 500 single male asylum seekers to Beaconside in Stafford? And can I ask him to meet with me urgently to discuss this, given the huge amount of objections I've received from constituents on this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, firstly, Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend back to her place? And I know that this is an issue that is concerning her and her constituents, and it's why we must absolutely stop the boats and stem the tide of illegal migrants to relieve this pressure on our local communities. But I will ensure that she meets with the Home Secretary as soon as possible to discuss her concerns, and hopefully we can arrange that meeting in the coming days.
Rishi Sunak talking about Theo Clarke being back in her place because she's just come back from maternity leave and using her first PMQs to raise immigration. Tim, while we've been going through these questions, somebody tweeted in, Sunak seemed to be over-promising there. I think actually that was about Brexit, but he's raised expectations on small boats as well.
Well, actually, if you look at the pledge amongst the 5 pledges is to pass legislation to deal with it. It's not to stop the boats, but he keeps saying he's going to stop the boats. And frankly, if he doesn't now, he's got a problem. I did think it was quite nice that, welcome back the Honourable Lady, but she can go and meet the Home Secretary. Thank you very much.
Welcome, not that welcome. Yeah, so normal people won't notice this, but on all government press releases now, there is this little strap across the top, which at first appears to be an advert, but essentially it says our priorities: halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and stop the boats, which is much further than the...
Well, it doesn't really pass legislation to curtail the boats. Doesn't quite
pass
fit,
legislation that may or may not stop the boats.
May or may not in the fullness of time.
Yeah. I suppose it's just a reminder that actually, as Keir Starmer, as we discussed, Keir Starmer throughout PMQs, Lara was trying to sort of needle the relationship between Rishi Sunak and his own MPs. And then his own MPs duly obliged on immigration.
Very much duly obliged on immigration and also on other issues as well. I don't know if we'll play it, but we did have a question from Robert Buckland as well, who, the former Welsh Secretary, obviously, saying it's slightly perplexing that colleagues are sounding off about an agreement that they haven't even seen yet, which I'm sure will have rankled quite a few people on his own benches as well. So you're right, did not necessarily need Keir Starmer to make some of the most important points of this week's Prime Minister's questions. You're right.
Didn't Sunak sound delighted to be asked about one of the 5 disasters that he's trying to deal with, instead of Oh, immigration.
Immigration.
Bring it
Lovely.
on.
Bring it
Let
on.
me talk about the boats.
Let me talk about some other thing that I've got
other
hangover.
than Brexit. You know.
Lovely to see you all. Tim, nice to see you. What can we expect in the Sunday Times?
I would be very surprised if I wasn't writing about the B word in some form.
Lovely. Boris or Brexit? Or both?
Ah, that'd be odd if
or
it
boats.
wasn't.
Any number of things.
Who knows? The
Yes.
3 Bs.
Tim Shipman, Chief Political Commentator of the Sunday Times. Lovely to see you. And Lara Spirit, Times Redbox reporter, will be in your inbox in a couple of hours with a PMQs Unpacked Redbox email. Times subscribers, I know you all are subscribers, so what you can do right now is go to thetimes.co.uk/redbox and get Lara in your inbox in a couple of hours' time. Lovely to see you both. Right, up next, we're going to talk about the Prime Minister's wife's slippers, and we're going to play the quiz. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio with the Net Wealth, of course. Lovely. For a clear review of your financial world, go to netwealth.com.
The Recharge, every Friday afternoon from 1 on Times Radio with BMW and The Recharge.